The moment Caleb Morgan's phone buzzed with his CEO's name at 11 p.m., he knew his carefully constructed world was about to shatter. Vivian Hale didn't call employees after hours. She didn't send personal invitations. She definitely didn't ask single fathers to private dinners where the only thing on the menu was truth. But she had. And when a woman who rebuilt empires decides she wants to rebuild you, saying no isn't really an option. It's just the coward's way of delaying the inevitable. If you want to see how a guarded strategist and an untouchable CEO risk everything they've built for something they never planned, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of Westbrook Dynamics hummed their familiar midnight song, and Caleb Morgan was still at his desk. This wasn't dedication. This was survival. Around him, the office had emptied hours ago. Abandoned coffee cups scattered across desks, screensavers bouncing in the darkness, the custodial staff making their rounds with the quiet efficiency of ghosts. Caleb barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the quarterly projection spreadsheet, numbers bleeding into each other as exhaustion crept into his peripheral vision. 36 years old, and he'd perfected the art of invisibility. Not the kind that came from being unremarkable. Caleb was good at his job, brilliant even, according to the quarterly reviews that piled up in his personnel file. No, his invisibility was intentional, strategic. He'd learned years ago that the quieter you were, the less people expected from you. The less they expected, the less they could take away. His phone vibrated against the faux wood surface of his desk. Ellie, Mobile. Daddy, when are you coming home? The misspelling made him smile despite the weight pressing down on his shoulders. 7 years old and already mastering the art of guilt-tripping through text message. He glanced at the corner of his screen, 11:47 p.m. Mrs. Chen, his neighbor and part-time lifesaver, was probably asleep on his couch by now, waiting for him to come home so she could shuffle back to her apartment next door. Caleb. Soon, baby. Did you brush your teeth? Ellie. Mobile. Yes, Mrs. Chen made me. Love you, Daddy. The familiar ache settled in his chest, that particular brand of guilt that came with single parenthood. The constant calculation of whether he was doing enough, being enough, sacrificing the right things in the right proportions. He saved the spreadsheet and shut down his computer. The elevator ride down felt longer at night. Caleb watched his reflection in the polished steel doors, dark hair going gray at the temples faster than he'd like to admit. Tie loosened, the perpetual shadows under his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. He looked like what he was, a man holding everything together through sheer force of will and careful planning. Chicago's north side was quieter at this hour, the streets slick with late November rain. Caleb's Toyota, practical, reliable, completely unremarkable, sat in the corner of the parking garage where he always left it. Predictability was safety. Routine was armor. The drive home took 18 minutes. He'd timed it hundreds of times. Mrs. Chen was indeed asleep on the couch when he slipped through the door, her reading glasses perched on her chest, a Korean drama frozen on the TV screen. Caleb gently touched her shoulder. Mr. Morgan, she whispered, blinking awake. So late again. I know. I'm sorry. That girl, she worry about you. Mrs. Chen gathered her things, her expression somewhere between concern and disapproval. Every night, she asked when Daddy coming home. The guilt twisted deeper. I'll make it up to her this weekend. You say that every week. But her eyes were kind as she shuffled toward the door. She's sleeping now. Good girl, that one. You're lucky. I know. After she left, Caleb stood in the doorway of Ellie's room, watching the rise and fall of her small chest beneath the unicorn comforter. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, spread across the pillow. On her nightstand sat a framed photo, Sarah, smiling, alive, holding a newborn Ellie. 3 years before the cancer, 5 years before Caleb learned what it meant to be both mother and father. He closed the door quietly and moved to the kitchen. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living space that barely fit a couch and TV, but it was theirs. Safe, controlled. The lease was in his name, the bills were on autopay, and nothing ever surprised him here, except when it did. His phone buzzed again, and this time the name on the screen made his stomach drop. Vivian Hale, CEO. Caleb stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering. Hello? Caleb. Her voice was exactly as it always was. Crisp, controlled, absolutely certain. I hope I'm not calling too late. It was nearly midnight. She knew exactly how late it was. No, it's fine. Is everything all right? Did something happen with the Meridian account? Nothing's wrong. A pause. I'm calling about something else entirely. Caleb's mind raced through possibilities. Layoffs? Restructuring? Had he made some catastrophic error in the quarterly report? I'd like to have dinner with you, Vivian said. Tomorrow night, if you're available. The words didn't make sense. Caleb replayed them, searching for the corporate subtext he'd missed. Dinner? Yes. There's something I want to discuss. Something long-term. Long-term. That meant contract negotiations, probably. A new position. Maybe he was being moved to a different division. Of course, he heard himself say. What time? 7. I'll text you the address. Another pause, briefer this time. And Caleb? Come alone. The line went dead. Caleb stood in his darkened kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to decode what had just happened. Vivian Hale didn't do personal dinners. She didn't call employees at midnight. She definitely didn't add mysterious clauses like come alone. He told himself it was business. He told himself he wasn't worried. He was lying on both counts. The next morning arrived with all the chaos of any Thursday in the Morgan household. Daddy, I can't find my left shoe. Check under your bed. I already did. Check again. Caleb stood at the stove, flipping scrambled eggs while simultaneously signing Ellie's permission slip for the field trip to the aquarium, his phone wedged between his shoulder and ear as he half listened to a voicemail from accounting about expense reports. This was his real job, the one that required more multitasking than any corporate position ever could. Found it! Ellie emerged from her room, one shoe on, the other clutched triumphantly in her hand. It was under my bed. Imagine that! Caleb slid eggs onto her plate next to the toast. Eat fast, kiddo. Bus comes in 12 minutes. She climbed onto the kitchen chair, legs swinging. Mrs. Chen said you came home really late last night. I had work to finish. You always have work to finish? It wasn't accusatory, just observational. 7-year-olds had a way of cutting straight to truth. I know. Caleb sat across from her with his coffee. But this weekend, I promise, just you and me. Whatever you want to do. Can we go to the park and get ice cream, even though it's cold? Even though it's cold. Ellie grinned, egg smeared across her cheek. Caleb reached over with a napkin, and she squirmed away, laughing. These moments. This was what mattered. Everything else was just noise he had to endure to keep this safe. Westbrook Dynamics occupied floors 12 through 17 of a glass tower in the Loop. Caleb arrived at 8:47 a.m., early enough to seem dedicated, late enough that most people were already at their desks and wouldn't try to make small talk in the elevator. His workspace was a cubicle near the northwest corner, with a partial view of the Chicago River and enough privacy to think. Photos of Ellie covered one wall of his partition, first day of kindergarten, last Halloween dressed as a dinosaur, the two of them at Navy Pier last summer. Morgan. Caleb looked up to find James Reeves, another senior strategist, leaning against the cubicle wall with his usual coffee and superiority complex. Reeves, heard the Ice Queen summoned you to her office yesterday. Vivian's nickname among the staff. Caleb had always hated it, not because it was cruel, but because it was reductive. Vivian Hale had built Westbrook Dynamics from a failing startup into a major player in enterprise software. She'd navigated hostile takeovers, market crashes, and a board of directors that had tried to oust her twice. Calling her the Ice Queen was just another way men dismissed women who refused to smile on command. Just routine check-in, Caleb lied smoothly. Sure, James smirked. Routine midnight phone calls, we've all been there. Caleb's blood went cold. How did you... Dude, office buildings have security cameras, timestamps on badge swipes. You weren't exactly subtle leaving at midnight. James took a sip of his coffee. Plus, Sarah in HR mentioned Vivian cleared her calendar for tonight. Dinner meeting with internal stakeholder. Very mysterious. This was exactly what Caleb had spent 5 years avoiding. Attention, speculation, the kind of workplace gossip that turned into assumptions, then expectations, then disasters. It's about the Meridian integration, Caleb said flatly. Nothing mysterious about it. If you say so, James pushed off the cubicle wall. Just seems weird, you know? Vivian doesn't usually wine and dine the worker bees. Must be something special. After he left, Caleb sat very still, staring at his blank monitor. This was a mistake. Whatever Vivian wanted to discuss, it was already generating exactly the kind of attention he couldn't afford. He should cancel. Claim Ellie was sick. Make up an excuse. His phone buzzed. Vivian Hale, CEO, Giordano's on Rush Street, 7 p.m. Looking forward to it. No escape route. No polite way to back out. Caleb spent the rest of the day in meetings he barely remembered, conversations that washed over him like white noise. His mind kept circling back to that phone call, to Vivian's voice, calm, certain, revealing nothing, something long-term. What did that mean? At 4:30, he packed up his laptop and headed for the elevator. Early departure would generate questions, but missing Ellie's pickup would generate consequences he couldn't afford. The elementary school was a 15-minute drive, and Caleb timed it perfectly, pulling into the pickup lane just as the bell rang. Ellie emerged in a flood of small humans, her backpack almost as big as she was, her face lighting up when she spotted the Toyota. "Daddy!" She scrambled into the back seat. "We learned about jellyfish today. Did you know some of them are immortal?" "I did not know that." "It's true. Miss Rodriguez said they can reverse their aging and become babies again. Isn't that cool?" Caleb glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her enthusiasm bubbling over. "Very cool. Can humans do that?" "Unfortunately not, kiddo. That's dumb. We should be able to." She kicked her feet against his seat. "What's for dinner?" "Dinner. Right. Actually, I have a work meeting tonight. Mrs. Chen is going to make you mac and cheese." Ellie's face fell. "Another meeting?" "Just this once, I promise." "You said that last week." She wasn't wrong. Caleb merged into traffic, guilt sitting heavy in his chest. "I know, I'm sorry, but this weekend, I know. Whatever I want." She sighed dramatically. "Grown-ups have too many meetings." "You're absolutely right." At home, Mrs. Chen was already waiting, her usual efficiency making Caleb feel simultaneously grateful and inadequate. He changed into the only suit he owned that didn't scream budget constraints, charcoal gray, slightly too loose in the shoulders, but acceptable. Ellie watched from the doorway of his bedroom, suspicious. "You look fancy." "It's an important meeting." "With who?" "My boss." "The mean one?" Caleb paused, tie half knotted. "What makes you think she's mean?" "You always look worried when you talk about her." Kids noticed everything. It was terrifying. "She's not mean," Caleb said carefully. "She's just very professional." "That's what adults say when they mean mean." He knelt down to Ellie's level. "I promise she's not mean, and I promise I'll be home before you wake up tomorrow. Deal?" Ellie considered this, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "Deal. But you owe me extra ice cream." Noted. Giordano's on Rush Street was the kind of restaurant Caleb never went to. White tablecloths, wine lists that required a sommelier, prices that made his budget spreadsheet weep. He arrived at 6:55 p.m. because arriving early showed respect, but arriving too early showed desperation. The hostess, immaculate, poised, smiled when he gave his name. "Ms. Hale is already here, right this way." Of course she was already here. Vivian was always early, always prepared, always 3 moves ahead. The restaurant was dim in that expensive way, all ambient lighting and shadowed corners. Vivian sat at a table near the back, away from windows, away from crowds. Privacy. When she looked up and saw him approaching, something shifted in her expression. Too quick to read, too subtle to name. "Caleb." She stood extending her hand, professional, formal, safe. He shook it, feeling the brief pressure of her grip. "Ms. Hale." "Vivian, please." She gestured to the seat across from her. "We're not in the office." But they kind of were, weren't they? She was still his CEO. He was still her employee. The power dynamics didn't disappear just because they changed locations. Caleb sat, hyper-aware of every movement, every word. A waiter materialized with menus and water glasses, then vanished like smoke. "Thank you for coming," Vivian said, and her voice was different here. Less boardroom, more human. "I know this probably seems strange." "A little," Caleb admitted. "I'll be direct." She folded her hands on the table, and Caleb noticed she wasn't wearing rings. No wedding band, no jewelry except a simple watch. "I didn't ask you here to discuss the Meridian integration." His stomach dropped. "Okay?" "I asked because I wanted to have a conversation I couldn't have in the office." She paused. "About you." This was worse than he'd imagined. "If this is about my performance." "It's not." Vivian's eyes, gray, sharp, impossible to lie to, held his. "It's about the fact that you're one of the few people at Westbrook who seems to exist entirely outside the usual corporate ambition. You leave board meetings mid-sentence when your daughter calls. You refuse weekend travel without apology. You turn down promotions that would require more hours." Caleb felt his defenses rising. "I have responsibilities outside work." "I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you." The waiter returned, and Vivian ordered wine without looking at the list. Caleb asked for water. When they were alone again, she continued, "Everyone else I know is so busy climbing they forget to ask why they're climbing at all. But you?" She tilted her head slightly. "You protect what matters. That's rare." This wasn't a criticism. It sounded almost like admiration. "I don't understand what this has to do with anything," Caleb said carefully. Vivian took a breath, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. "I'm 41 years old," she said. "I've built a successful company. I've survived boardroom coups and market crashes. I've given keynote speeches and closed billion-dollar deals." She paused. "And I'm tired of pretending that's enough." Caleb said nothing because he had no idea what to say. "I watch you," Vivian continued, and the words should have sounded creepy but somehow didn't. "I watch you leave every day at 5:30 sharp. I watch you take your daughter's calls no matter what meeting you're in. I watch you choose her consistently over everything else." "She's my daughter." "Exactly." Vivian's expression softened. "And I realized I've spent so long building something that I forgot to build a life worth living in." The waiter brought wine. Vivian took a sip, gathering herself. "This isn't a business dinner, Caleb. This is me asking if you'd be willing to have dinner with someone who's terrible at asking for things she actually wants." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Caleb's brain short-circuited. "You're asking me out?" "Yes. But you're my CEO." "I'm aware of the complication. There are policies, HR regulations, power dynamics." "All true." Vivian didn't look away. "Which is why I'm asking, not assuming. Why I'm having this conversation away from the office, where you can say no without consequence." Could he, though? Could anyone really say no to their CEO and believe there wouldn't be fallout? But when Caleb looked at Vivian, really looked, he didn't see the Ice Queen. He didn't see the woman who'd made a senior VP cry in a budget meeting. He saw someone who'd built walls as carefully as he had and was now trying to tear them down. "I don't date," Caleb said quietly. "I don't have time, I don't have energy, and I don't—" "You don't want to risk it," Vivian finished. "I understand that. Believe me, I understand that better than you know." "Then why are you asking?" "Because I'm tired of being careful." She met his eyes. "And because I think you might be too, even if you won't admit it." The server appeared to take their order, and the moment fractured. Caleb ordered something at random, not even registering what it was. His mind was spinning, trying to process this impossible situation. When the server left, Vivian leaned back slightly, giving him space. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," she said. "I'm just asking you to consider it. To consider whether the life you've built is the one you actually want, or just the one that feels safest." That hit too close to home. Caleb thought about his apartment, small, controlled, predictable. He thought about his routine, precise, unchanging, safe. He thought about Ellie and how she was the only variable he allowed in his carefully managed existence. "I lost someone," he said suddenly. "Ellie's mother, cancer. 3 years after she was born." Vivian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. I'm sorry. I swore I'd never let Ellie experience that kind of instability again. That I'd build something solid for her, sour her, something that couldn't be taken away. And you have. But that means not taking risks, not letting people in who might leave. Caleb's hands tightened around his water glass. Not doing exactly what you're asking me to do. I know. Vivian's voice was gentle. But Caleb, you do realize that the instability you're avoiding, you're creating it anyway by refusing to let anyone close enough to matter. The words settled over him like snow. I built this company from nothing, Vivian continued. People think that means I'm fearless. It just means I learned not to depend on anyone. I learned to control every variable, manage every risk, trust nothing I couldn't quantify. She paused. And I'm lonely as hell. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. So this isn't about romance, Caleb said slowly. So this is about two people who've built such good fortresses, they forgot they were prisons. Maybe. Vivian almost smiled. Vivian. Or maybe it's just about two adults who are tired of pretending they don't want something more. The food arrived, but neither of them really ate. They talked instead, carefully at first, then more freely. Vivian told him about growing up in Milwaukee, watching her father's construction company collapse during the recession, learning that stability was a lie people told themselves. Caleb told her about Sarah, about the 2 years of treatments and hope and gradual acceptance, about becoming a single father at 29 and realizing he had no idea what he was doing. Ellie draws pictures, he found himself saying. This week, she drew 3 people holding hands. 2 I recognized. The third had long hair. Did you ask who it was? No. Why not? Because I was afraid of the answer. Caleb set down his fork. She's 7. She shouldn't be worrying about whether I'm lonely. Maybe she's not worried. Maybe she's just hoping. The restaurant was closing around them, staff politely clearing nearby tables. Caleb checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. They'd been talking for over 4 hours. I should go, he said. Mrs. Chen is probably asleep on my couch again. They stood, and the moment became awkward in that uniquely adult way, too formal for what they'd shared, too uncertain for what came next. Outside, Chicago wind cut across Rush Street, sharp and cold. Vivian pulled her coat tighter. Why, thank you, she said, for coming, for being honest. I didn't agree to anything. I know. She looked at him steadily. But you didn't say no either. Caleb watched her walk to her car, a Tesla, naturally, silent and efficient. She didn't look back. He stood there for a long moment, the city moving around him before pulling out his phone. One new message. Ellie. Mobile. Daddy. There's a monster under my bed, but Mrs. Chen said it's just the heater. I miss you. Caleb's chest tightened. He texted back immediately. Caleb. No monsters, just old pipes. I'll be home soon. Love you, baby. The drive home felt longer than usual, his mind replaying the entire evening. Vivian's words, her expressions, the way she'd looked when she admitted to being lonely, the way he'd felt when he realized he understood exactly what she meant. Mrs. Chen was indeed asleep on his couch, Korean drama still playing softly. Caleb woke her gently, apologized again, and after she left, he stood in his quiet apartment. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Safe, controlled, predictable, empty. He checked on Ellie, sleeping peacefully, no monsters except the ones in her imagination. On her nightstand, next to the photo of Sarah, sat the drawing with 3 stick figures. Caleb picked it up, studying the long-haired figure. This complicates everything, he whispered to the darkness. But maybe, a small voice suggested, that wasn't actually a bad thing. His phone buzzed one last time. Vivian Hale. Thank you for tonight. No pressure, no expectations, just gratitude for your honesty. Sleep well, Caleb. He stared at the message for a long time before responding. Caleb, you too. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Morgan allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, the safest choice wasn't always the right one. Outside his window, Chicago glittered in the November night, a city of 8 million people, most of them strangers, all of them taking risks every single day. Maybe it was time he took one too. The text message sat unanswered on Caleb's phone for 3 days. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because every response felt like stepping off a cliff he couldn't see the bottom of. Thank you seemed dismissive. I'd like to see you again felt too forward. I need time sounded like the beginning of a rejection he wasn't sure he meant. So he said nothing. And Vivian, to her credit, didn't push. Work continued with its usual rhythm. Meetings about projected revenue, emails about the Meridian integration, James Reeves making pointed comments about late-night dinners that Caleb pretended not to hear. On the surface, nothing had changed. Caleb still left at 5:30, still picked up Ellie, still maintained the careful distance between his professional and personal lives. But something had shifted underneath, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, building pressure. Friday afternoon, Caleb was reviewing contract terms when his desk phone rang. The internal extension made his stomach drop before he even picked up. Morgan speaking. Caleb, Vivian's voice, professional and measured. Do you have a moment to stop by my office? This was it. The conversation where she clarified expectations, or worse, gently suggested he transfer departments to avoid awkwardness. HR would be involved. There would be paperwork. Of course, I'll be right up. The executive floor was quieter than the rest of the building, all glass walls and intimidating furniture. Vivian's assistant, a woman named Patricia who'd been with her for a decade and saw everything, gestured toward the closed office door. She's expecting you. Caleb knocked twice before entering. Vivian sat behind her desk, the Chicago skyline sprawling behind her like a kingdom she'd conquered through sheer determination. She looked up when he entered, and her expression was unreadable. Close the door, please. He did, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sit. Caleb sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Vivian's fingers drummed once against her desk, the only tell that she was anything other than perfectly composed. I owe you an apology, she said finally. That wasn't what he'd expected. For what? For putting you in an impossible position. She leaned back in her chair. I spent the last 3 days thinking about that dinner, and I realized I asked you something deeply unfair. You asked me to dinner. I asked my employee to consider a romantic relationship with me while he sat across from someone who controls his career trajectory. Vivian's jaw tightened. That's not asking. That's coercion, whether I intended it or not. Caleb had spent 3 days wrestling with exactly this question, whether his attraction to Vivian was genuine or just a biological response to power dynamics, whether he could ever truly say no to her and believe it wouldn't affect his job. What if I don't see it that way? He heard himself ask. Vivian's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I mean, Caleb chose his words carefully. I've spent 3 days wondering if I'm only interested because you're my CEO. If this is some kind of unconscious power thing. He met her gaze. But then I remember that I liked the way you talked about your father's company. I liked that you admitted to being lonely instead of pretending you had it all figured out. I liked that you didn't try to sell me on romance. You just said you were tired of being careful. Vivian was very still. Those things have nothing to do with you being my boss, Caleb continued. They have to do with you being honest in a way most people aren't. That doesn't change the power dynamic. No, it doesn't. Caleb folded his hands in his lap. Which is why I've been thinking about what you said, about whether the life I've built is the one I want, or just the one that feels safest. And I think you were right. The admission felt like pulling out a splinter, painful but necessary. I've been so focused on protecting Ellie from instability that I forgot she might need to see what healthy risk-taking looks like. Vivian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Caleb, but... He interrupted gently. I can't do this if there's any question about power dynamics. I can't wonder if I'm keeping my job because we're involved, or if I lose it because we're not. I would never, I know you wouldn't consciously, but that doesn't mean people won't think it. That doesn't mean I won't wonder. Caleb straightened in his chair. So if we're going to do this, and I'm not saying we are, I'm saying if, then we need to do it right. Vivian leaned forward. And for the first time since he'd entered her office, she smiled, small but genuine. What does right look like to you? I don't report to you. Different division, different chain of command, Everything documented with HR so there's no appearance of favoritism. He paused. And we take it slow, because I have a 7-year-old who comes first, always. I wouldn't expect anything else. She draws pictures of you, Caleb said suddenly. Well, not you specifically, but a woman with long hair, holding hands with us. Vivian's breath caught. Does she know about... No, she just notices that I came home late after a dinner meeting and apparently decided that meant something. He ran a hand through his hair. Kids are perceptive in ways that terrify me. What did you tell her? Nothing yet, because I didn't know what this was. Caleb met Vivian's eyes. Do I need to tell her something? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Vivian stood, moving to the window. Chicago spread out below her, and Caleb wondered if she ever got tired of the view or if power made even beauty feel routine. I've never dated someone with a child, she said quietly. I don't know how to do this. I've never dated someone who runs a company. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She turned back to face him. Two people who've become experts at avoiding exactly this kind of complication. So we're calling it a complication now? Would you prefer opportunity? Despite everything, Caleb laughed. It surprised them both. How about we start with coffee, he suggested. Somewhere that's not a restaurant, not the office, just neutral ground. Coffee. It's low stakes, 30 minutes. We can talk without a wine list and 4-hour commitments. Vivian considered this, then nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning? There's a place near Grant Park. 9 o'clock? I'll need to arrange a sitter. I can wait until later if... No. Caleb stood. If we're doing this, Ellie needs to know I'm making time for something that matters, not hiding it, not squeezing it into margins. He paused at the door. 9 o'clock works. Walking back to his desk, Caleb felt lighter than he had in days. Not because everything was resolved, but because for once, he'd chosen uncertainty over safety, and the world hadn't ended. James Reeves was lurking near the coffee station, clearly waiting for gossip. So? He asked with exaggerated casualness. Everything okay with the Ice Queen? Caleb poured himself coffee, taking his time. Her name is Vivian, and yes, everything's fine. Heard you were up there for 20 minutes. That's a long fine. It was about the reorganization, Caleb lied smoothly. Nothing dramatic. James looked skeptical, but didn't press. After he left, Caleb returned to his desk and opened his messaging app. Caleb, Mrs. Chen, are you available tomorrow morning from 8:30 to 10:30? I'll pay double the usual rate. The response came within minutes. Mrs. Chen, of course, Mr. Morgan. Everything okay? Caleb, everything's fine. Just have an appointment. Mrs. Chen, must be important appointment. You never ask for weekend help. She wasn't wrong. Caleb stared at his phone, then typed carefully. Caleb, it might be. I'll explain later. That evening, Ellie was unusually quiet during dinner. She pushed her chicken nuggets around her plate, building small architecture projects with her fries, not eating anything. What's going on, kiddo? Caleb asked. Nothing. That's a lot of nothing. She looked up at him with those dark eyes, Sarah's eyes, and Caleb braced himself. Are you going to get married again? The question hit him like a physical blow. What? Where did that come from? Taylor's dad got married again, to someone who's not Taylor's mom. Ellie's voice was small. And now Taylor has to go to 2 houses, and she doesn't like it. Caleb set down his fork, giving her his full attention. Is that what you're worried about? That I'll get married and you'll have to live somewhere else? Maybe. He moved his chair closer to hers. Ellie, listen to me. This is your home. Our home. That doesn't change no matter what happens. But what if you meet someone? Then I'd introduce you to them, and we'd take it really, really slow. And your opinion would matter more than anything else. He touched her hand gently. You're the most important person in my world. That's never going to change. Ellie studied him seriously. Do you want to meet someone? The question was so direct, so unflinchingly honest that Caleb almost laughed. I don't know, he said truthfully. Maybe. Would that be okay with you? She considered this with the gravity of someone deliberating international treaties. I guess, but only if she's nice and likes dinosaurs. Those are reasonable requirements. And ice cream. Obviously. Ellie finally smiled, picking up a chicken nugget. Okay, but I get to meet her before you decide anything. Deal. Later, after Ellie was asleep, Caleb stood in his kitchen with a beer. He wasn't really drinking, staring at his phone. Vivian's number sat in his contacts, professional and distant. He typed a message 3 times and deleted it 3 times. Finally, he settled on simple. Caleb, looking forward to coffee tomorrow. Fair warning, Ellie has established veto power based on whether you like dinosaurs and ice cream. The response came faster than expected. Vivian, I can work with those criteria, though I should disclose a preference for Triceratops and mint chocolate chip. Caleb, both acceptable choices. See you at 9. Vivian, good night, Caleb. He set down his phone and for the first time in years felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not fear. Hope. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for late November. Caleb dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, trying to find the balance between I care about this and I'm not overthinking this while absolutely overthinking it. Ellie watched from the bathroom doorway as he changed shirts for the 3rd time. You look nervous, she observed. I'm not nervous. You're doing the thing with your collar. Caleb stopped adjusting his collar. What thing? The thing you do when you're nervous. Like before parent-teacher conferences? She tilted her head. Is this about the person you might meet? He'd forgotten how terrifying it was to have a perceptive child. It's just coffee with someone from work, he said, which was technically true. Grown-ups are weird, Ellie declared, then wandered off to watch cartoons. Mrs. Chen arrived at 8:30, giving Caleb a knowing look that suggested she understood far more than he'd explained. You look nice, Mr. Morgan. It's just coffee. Her eyes twinkled. Important coffee, I think. He escaped before she could ask more questions. The coffee shop near Grant Park was one of those carefully curated places with exposed brick and baristas who took their craft very seriously. Caleb arrived at 8:55, ordered an Americano, and claimed a table near the window where he could watch for Vivian's arrival. She appeared at exactly 9 o'clock. But this wasn't CEO Vivian in her power suits and calculated presence. This was someone in jeans and a simple sweater, hair down instead of pulled back, looking almost uncertain. It made Caleb's chest tighten in unexpected ways. She spotted him and smiled, small, genuine, nothing like the professional mask she wore at Westbrook. Hi, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Hi. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and it felt absurdly like a first date, which Caleb supposed it kind of was. This is strange, Vivian said. Very. I've negotiated million-dollar acquisitions with more confidence than this. I've given presentations to the board without sweating this much. They both laughed, and the tension cracked slightly. Vivian ordered an espresso, and when the barista left, she folded her hands on the table in that way she did when gathering thoughts. I meant what I said in my office, she began, about the power dynamic. If this makes you uncomfortable at all, it does, Caleb interrupted, but not for the reasons you think. Then what reasons? It makes me uncomfortable because I actually like you, and I haven't allowed myself to like anyone in 5 years. He met her eyes. That has nothing to do with you being my CEO. That's just me being scared. Vivian's expression softened. I'm scared too. Really? You hide it well. Years of practice. She accepted her espresso from the barista. Building a company from nothing teaches you to project certainty even when you have no idea what you're doing. Eventually, the mask becomes indistinguishable from the face. Sounds exhausting. It is. She took a sip. Which is why sitting here with you feels so strange. I'm not performing. I'm just here. Caleb understood that better than she probably knew. He'd spent 5 years performing the role of stable single father, never letting anyone see the loneliness underneath. So what do we do? He asked. We talk. Vivian settled back in her chair. We figure out if this thing between us is real or just two lonely people recognizing their reflection. And if it's real, then we navigate it carefully, honestly, with your daughter's well-being as the priority. The fact that she led with Ellie's well-being told Caleb more than any declaration of interest could have. They talked for an hour, then 2. The coffee shop filled and emptied around them, the November sun tracking across the windows. Vivian told him about the early days of Westbrook, the failures that had nearly bankrupted her, the moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. Caleb told her about Sarah's final months, about learning to braid hair from YouTube videos, about the specific terror of raising a daughter in a world he barely understood. "Do you still love her?" Vivian asked quietly. "Sarah." The question should have felt invasive, but somehow it didn't. "I'll always love who she was," Caleb said carefully. "But I'm not holding space for a ghost. I'm scared of building something with someone and having it collapse again." "So you don't build anything at all?" "Exactly." Vivian traced the rim of her espresso cup. "After my first company failed, I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. I'd never trust partners, never rely on anything I couldn't control." She looked up. "But eventually I realized that trying to control everything just meant succeeding at nothing that mattered. So you built Westbrook. So I built Westbrook, and it worked until I realized I'd created a very successful prison." She paused. "You know what the hardest part is? Admitting that success isn't the same as happiness." Caleb thought about his carefully structured life, his predictable routines, his absolute control over every variable. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know exactly what you mean." They left the coffee shop as the lunch crowd began arriving. Outside, Grant Park stretched green and open despite the late season, joggers and dog walkers moving through the pathways. "I should get back," Caleb said. "Mrs. Chen charges by the hour, and Ellie's probably convinced her to make chocolate chip pancakes." "Before you go," Vivian hesitated, and it was strange seeing her uncertain. "I'd like to do this again, if you would." "I would. And I meant what I said about the HR documentation. I'll start the transfer request Monday. Different division, clean reporting structure." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "Because if we're going to do this right, it needs to be right from the beginning." Caleb nodded slowly. "Okay, then yes. I'd like to do this again." They stood there for a moment, and Caleb felt the pull to lean in, to close the distance, to seal this moment with something more than words. But this was too important to rush, too fragile to risk with premature gestures. Vivian seemed to understand. She smiled, touched his arm briefly, and then walked toward her car. Caleb watched her go, then pulled out his phone. "Caleb, I'm on my way home. How's the pancake situation?" "Mrs. Chen. 4 pancakes, much syrup. She is very happy. You are also happy, I think?" He smiled despite himself. Caleb: "Yeah, I think I am." When he got home, Ellie was at the kitchen table with syrup on her face and conspiracy in her eyes. "So?" she demanded. "Did you meet someone?" Mrs. Chen made a discreet exit, smiling. Caleb sat down across from his daughter. "I had coffee with someone from work." "Was she nice?" "She was very nice." "Does she like dinosaurs?" "I didn't ask, but I'll find out." Ellie considered this. "What's her name?" "Vivian." "That's a fancy name." "She's a fancy person." "Fancier than me?" Caleb reached over and wiped syrup from her cheek. "Nobody's fancier than you, kiddo. You're the fanciest person I know." Ellie grinned, satisfied. "Are you going to see her again?" "Maybe. Would that be okay?" "I guess." She swung her legs under the table. "But I still get to meet her first, right? Before you decide to marry her or whatever?" "Nobody's getting married. We're just having coffee." "That's what they all say." "But where did 7-year-olds learn this stuff?" "How about," Caleb suggested, "we table the marriage discussion and instead talk about what you want to do today? Ice cream? Park? Both?" "Both," Ellie said immediately. "And then, can we watch a movie?" "Deal." They spent the afternoon at the park, Ellie running circles around the playground while Caleb sat on a bench, watching her. His phone buzzed periodically with work emails he ignored, and once with a message from Vivian. "Vivian, thank you for this morning. I haven't felt that at ease in longer than I can remember." Caleb: "Me neither. Same time next week?" Vivian: "I'd like that. Though fair warning, Ellie's dinosaur preferences will be thoroughly researched." Caleb: "She'll appreciate the effort." Later at home, after ice cream and a movie, and the bedtime routine Caleb could do in his sleep, he tucked Ellie in and sat on the edge of her bed. "Daddy?" she said sleepily. "Yeah, baby?" "I think it's okay if you like Vivian." His heart stuttered. "What makes you say that?" "Because you smile different today. Like when you look at pictures of Mommy, but not sad." She yawned. "I like when you smile, not sad." Caleb kissed her forehead, throat tight. "Good night, Ellie." "Night, Daddy?" He turned off her light and stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her settle into sleep. Then he went to his own room and pulled out the box from the top of his closet, the one with Sarah's things. Photos, letters, the hospital bracelet from Ellie's birth. He looked through them slowly, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like betrayal to imagine moving forward. "I think I might be ready," he whispered to the photographs. "I hope that's okay." The pictures didn't answer, but somehow Caleb felt lighter. Monday morning, he arrived at work to find an email from HR about a departmental transfer. Effective immediately, he'd be moving to the Strategic Planning Division. Different floor, different supervisors, no direct reporting relationship to the CEO's office. Patricia, Vivian's assistant, appeared at his desk around 10. "Ms. Hale asked me to deliver this personally," she said, handing him a folder. Inside was the transfer documentation, fully executed, along with a handwritten note. Clean slate, no complications, just possibility. Caleb looked up to find Patricia watching him with knowing eyes. "She's never done this before," Patricia said quietly. "Just so you know, Vivian doesn't let people in." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've worked for her for 10 years and I've never seen her nervous about anything except you." Patricia smiled. "Don't waste it." After she left, Caleb sat with the folder, the note, the weight of what he was choosing. His phone buzzed. Ellie. Mobile. "Daddy, can Vivian come to my school play next month? It's about penguins." He stared at the message, heart hammering. This was happening. Actually happening. "Caleb, let me ask her. When is it?" Ellie. Mobile. "December 18th, 7 p.m. I'm penguin number 3. Caleb switched to his conversation with Vivian. "Caleb, Ellie wants to know if you'd like to attend her school play. December 18th, she's penguin number 3. The response took longer this time, and Caleb could almost see Vivian processing what this meant, being invited into his daughter's life, crossing from coffee dates into actual integration. "Vivian, I would be honored to watch penguin number 3 perform. Should I prepare remarks? I've never attended a second-grade production." Caleb, "Just show up. She'll handle the rest." Vivian, "Then I'll be there." Caleb set down his phone and looked around his new workspace. Different view, different colleagues, different everything. But somehow, for the first time in 5 years, different didn't feel dangerous. It felt like possibility. The weeks between that Monday morning and December 18th moved with a strange duality, simultaneously crawling and racing, each day both endless and insufficient. Caleb and Vivian fell into a rhythm that felt less like dating and more like careful excavation, two archaeologists brushing away years of protective sediment to see what lay underneath. Coffee on Saturday mornings became routine. Then dinner on Wednesday evenings, carefully scheduled around Ellie's bedtime. They talked about everything except what they were doing, as if naming it might make it collapse under its own weight. At work, the transfer created exactly the distance they needed. Caleb reported to Marcus Chen now, a strategic planning director who cared more about quarterly projections than office politics. The gossip that had swirled around him and Vivian dissipated without fuel, and James Reeves found new targets for his speculation. But Chicago was a small world when you worked in tech, and not everyone was willing to let it go. It was the second week of December when the complication arrived, wrapped in expensive cologne and passive aggression. Caleb was reviewing budget allocations when someone knocked on his cubicle wall. He looked up to find Derek Hartman, Westbrook's chief financial officer and the closest thing Vivian had to a rival on the executive team, standing there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morgan, right? Senior strategist?" "That's right." Caleb straightened in his chair, instinct telling him this wasn't a friendly visit. "Derek Hartman, CFO. Mind if I sit?" He didn't wait for an answer, pulling over a chair from an empty desk and settling in like he owned the space. In a way, he did. "I've been reviewing the Q4 reports," Derek said conversationally. "Impressive work on the Meridian integration projections. Very thorough." Thank you. Must have required a lot of late nights, one-on-one sessions with leadership. Derek's eyes were sharp. With Vivian, specifically. There it was. The reason for this visit. Caleb kept his expression neutral. The Meridian project was company-wide. I worked with several executives. Of course. Derek leaned back, casual. It's just interesting, the timing. You're working closely with the CEO on a major integration, then suddenly you're transferred to a different division. Makes people wonder. Wonder what, exactly? Whether the transfer was professional necessity or personal convenience. Derek smiled. You understand how it looks, don't you? Vivian's not exactly known for making special accommodations for employees. Caleb's jaw tightened. My transfer was approved through proper HR channels. If you have concerns about protocol, you should direct them to human resources, not me. Oh, I'm not concerned. Derek stood, brushing imaginary lint from his suit. Just wanted to introduce myself. We haven't had a chance to meet properly, and I like to know everyone who has Vivian's ear these days. He paused at the cubicle entrance, especially the ones who get midnight phone calls and private dinners. After he left, Caleb sat very still, processing what had just happened. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was a warning shot, carefully aimed. His phone buzzed. Vivian, can you talk? My office, if you're free. Caleb, give me 5 minutes. He found her standing at her window, shoulders tense, the Chicago skyline spread behind her like a battlefield. Derek just left my office, she said without turning around. He made some very pointed comments about favoritism and special treatment. He stopped by my desk too. Now she turned, and Caleb saw the anger simmering beneath her professional mask. What did he say? That my transfer looks suspicious, that people are wondering about accommodation for personal convenience. Caleb closed the door behind him. He knows Vivian, or at least suspects. Derek always suspects. It's his default mode. She moved to her desk, hands gripping the edge. He's been trying to undermine me since the board considered him for CEO 5 years ago. This is just his latest strategy. What does he want? My job, eventually. But right now? He wants to create enough doubt about my judgment that the board questions my leadership. Vivian's voice was cold, calculated. And apparently, he's decided you're the perfect ammunition. The words hit Caleb like a punch. So I'm a liability. No. She looked up sharply. You're a person I care about who's being weaponized by someone who sees everything as a transaction. Same result, different phrasing. Vivian crossed the space between them, and for a moment Caleb thought she might touch him, might break her own rule about maintaining professional distance in the office. But she stopped just short, close enough that he could see the conflict in her eyes. I won't let him do this, she said quietly. I won't let him turn something good into something shameful. What are you going to do? I'm going to call his bluff. Her voice hardened. Derek operates in shadows and implications. He'll never make a formal complaint because that would require actual evidence, so I'm going to make sure there's nothing to find. Caleb understood what she wasn't saying. You want to pull back. I want to be smart. There's a difference. She finally did touch him then, just her hand on his arm, brief and warm. We knew this wouldn't be easy. We just need to navigate carefully until it's not news anymore. And the school play? Vivian's expression softened. I'll be there. I promised Ellie, and I keep my promises. That'll make it worse. Derek will see it as... I don't care what Derek sees it as. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. I care about a 7-year-old who invited me to watch her be penguin number 3. Everything else is noise. After Caleb left her office, he sat in his car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, trying to calm the anxiety crawling up his spine. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. The moment when their relationship stopped being private and became public leverage. When caring about someone meant giving enemies ammunition. His phone rang. Not a text, an actual call. From Ellie's school. His heart stopped. Mr. Morgan? This is Principal Davis at Riverside Elementary. Is Ellie okay? She's fine, physically. But there was an incident at recess, and I think you should come pick her up early. 20 minutes later, Caleb was sitting in the principal's office with Ellie beside him, her eyes red from crying, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Principal Davis, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steel spine, explained the situation with practiced diplomacy. There was a disagreement on the playground. Some comments were made about Ellie's family situation, and Ellie responded strongly. What kind of comments? Caleb's voice was carefully controlled. Principal Davis glanced at Ellie. Perhaps Ellie should tell you. Ellie's voice was small. Madison said I was weird because I don't have a mom, and that my dad probably couldn't take care of me right because dads don't know how to do girl stuff. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. So I pushed her. You pushed her? Just a little. She was being mean. Principal Davis intervened. No one was hurt, but physical contact is against school policy, regardless of provocation. Caleb pulled Ellie close, anger and protectiveness warring in his chest. What's Madison's consequence? We'll be speaking with her parents about appropriate behavior, but right now I need to address Ellie's response. Principal Davis softened slightly. I understand this is a sensitive topic. Single-parent households face unique challenges, and children can be cruel about differences they don't understand. She said my family was wrong, Ellie whispered against Caleb's shoulder. I just wanted her to stop. The drive home was quiet. Ellie stared out the window, small and defeated in her booster seat. Caleb's mind raced through everything he should say, all the parenting wisdom he'd absorbed from books and forums and desperate late-night Googling. Finally, he pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and turned to face her. What Madison said was cruel and wrong, he said quietly. Our family isn't broken or weird, it's just different. Then why do people say stuff like that? Because people fear what they don't understand, and sometimes they try to make themselves feel better by making others feel worse. He reached back to take her hand, but pushing her wasn't the answer. I know. Ellie's lip trembled. I just got so mad. I get mad too sometimes, at work, when people say things that aren't fair or true. He squeezed her hand. But we have to find better ways to deal with it. Like what? Like using our words instead of our hands. Like telling a teacher. Like walking away when someone's trying to get a reaction. He paused. Or sometimes, like knowing that their opinion doesn't actually matter because we know the truth about who we are. Ellie considered this. Do you ever wish I had a mom, so things would be easier? The question cracked something in Caleb's chest. I wish you could have known your mom, but easier? No, because then you wouldn't be exactly who you are, and you're pretty amazing exactly as you are. Even when I push people? Even when you push people, though we're working on that. He smiled. How about we get ice cream and talk about better revenge strategies, like beating Madison in the spelling bee or becoming president of the student council? Can I do both? Absolutely. They got ice cream despite the December cold, and Caleb listened as Ellie processed her feelings about family and fairness and the unfairness of 7-year-old social politics. By the time they got home, she was calmer, more herself. That evening, after Ellie was asleep, Caleb texted Vivian about what had happened. Caleb, Ellie got in a fight at school today. Another kid made comments about her not having a mother. The response came quickly. Vivian, is she okay? Caleb, physically, yes. Emotionally processing. She pushed the other kid. Vivian, good for her. Caleb, that's not the recommended parental response. Vivian, probably not. But sometimes pushing back is necessary, even if it comes with consequences. Caleb stared at that message, understanding the subtext. They were both navigating territories where pushing back meant consequences, where protecting what mattered meant accepting that some people would judge them for it. Caleb, she asked if I wish she had a mom so things would be easier. Vivian, what did you tell her? Caleb, the truth. That easier isn't always better. Vivian, you're a good father, Caleb. Caleb, I'm trying. Most days I have no idea what I'm doing. Vivian, that's called being human. The important part is that you keep showing up. Caleb, speaking of showing up, you're still okay with the school play? After Derek's comments? Vivian, especially after Derek's comments. I refuse to let him dictate my personal life. Caleb, fair warning, second-grade productions are long, loud, and extremely committed to penguin-related storytelling. Vivian, I've sat through board meetings that lasted 6 hours. I think I can handle some penguins. December 18th arrived with unexpected snow, Chicago blanketed in white that made everything look cleaner than it was. Caleb spent the morning helping Ellie with her costume, a penguin outfit that was mostly black trash bags and white poster board, crafted with the kind of enthusiasm that exceeded its structural integrity. "Do I look like a penguin?" Ellie asked, waddling around the living room. "The most convincing penguin I've ever seen." "You're just saying that because you're my dad." "I'm saying it because it's true. Penguin number 3 is clearly the star of this production." She beamed, and Caleb felt that familiar tightness in his chest, pride mixed with protective terror, love mixed with the constant fear that he was somehow getting it all wrong. The school auditorium was packed with parents by the time they arrived for the pre-show rehearsal. Caleb helped Ellie backstage, where 25 second graders in various states of penguin costume created controlled chaos. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ellie's teacher, was orchestrating the madness with impressive patience. "Mr. Morgan," she called out. "Perfect timing. Ellie's beak keeps falling off." He spent 15 minutes with tape and prayer, securing the orange paper cone to Ellie's face with enough adhesive to survive the performance, but not enough to remove skin when it came off. "There," he said, stepping back to admire his work. "Perfectly penguin." "Is Vivian coming?" Ellie asked, voice slightly muffled by the beak. "She said she'd be here." "What if she doesn't like it?" "She's going to love it. How could she not love penguin number 3? Ellie grinned behind her beak, and Caleb kissed the top of her head before heading to find a seat. The auditorium was filling rapidly, parents claiming territory with the intensity of geopolitical negotiation. Caleb found a seat near the middle, saving the one beside him with his coat. Vivian arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. She wasn't dressed like a CEO tonight, no power suit, no armor of professional distance. Just jeans, a simple sweater, her hair down. She looked young and uncertain as she scanned the crowd, and when her eyes found Caleb's, her smile was genuine. "Hi," she said, sliding into the saved seat. "Hi, you made it." "I promised." She glanced around at the decorations, construction paper snowflakes and glittery penguins covering every surface. "This is very festive." "Wait until you see the production value. They really commit to the Antarctic aesthetic." Vivian laughed quietly, and Caleb felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. This was good. Normal. Just 2 adults at a school play, nothing scandalous about it. Then he saw Derek Hartman's wife 3 rows ahead, turning to look at them with barely concealed interest. Of course. The universe had a terrible sense of timing. "Don't look now," Caleb murmured. "But we have an audience." Vivian didn't turn. "Derek's wife? How did you—" "I saw her when I came in. She texted Derek approximately 30 seconds after I sat down." Vivian's voice was calm, controlled. "Let her look. We're not doing anything wrong." The lights dimmed before Caleb could respond, and the second-grade production of Penguins in Paradise began with all the chaotic enthusiasm of children who'd had too much sugar and not enough stage direction. Ellie was magnificent. Her speaking role consisted of exactly 3 lines. "But where will we live, though? The ice is melting. And we must find a new home," which she delivered with the gravitas of someone performing Shakespeare. Her penguin waddle was committed. Her flippers were expressive. When the other penguins gathered for the final number, she was perfectly in sync for approximately 30% of the choreography. Caleb had never been prouder. Beside him, Vivian watched with focused attention, and at one point, when Ellie executed a particularly ambitious penguin slide across the stage, Vivian laughed, genuine, delighted, unguarded. The performance lasted 45 minutes. 45 minutes of children singing off-key about climate change and penguin solidarity, of costumes falling apart mid-scene, of one memorable moment when the backdrop fell over and 3 penguins had to hold it up while continuing their dialogue. It was perfect. When it ended, the audience erupted in applause that was 90% parental obligation and 10% genuine relief. Caleb stood immediately, clapping hard enough that his hands hurt. "She was wonderful," Vivian said, and she actually meant it. She really was. They made their way backstage, where proud parents collected costumed children and teachers looked exhausted but satisfied. Ellie spotted them immediately and came running, her beak now hanging sideways, her trash bag costume rustling. "Did you see me? Did you see my slide?" "You were amazing," Caleb said, scooping her up despite her protests about being too big for that. "The best penguin number 3 I've ever seen," Vivian added. Ellie turned to look at her, eyes bright with excitement and something else. Evaluation. This was the moment, the test Caleb hadn't known Ellie was planning. "Did you like the part about climate change?" Ellie asked seriously. "I thought it was very important," Vivian replied, equally serious. "Penguins deserve better." "That's what I said, but Madison said penguins are stupid. Madison sounds like she has questionable judgment." Ellie's eyes widened. "That's what Daddy said." Other parents were starting to notice them now. The CEO of a major tech company standing in an elementary school gym, talking to an employee's daughter about penguins. Caleb saw the looks, the whispers beginning to circulate. "We should probably," he started. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Ellie interrupted, still focused on Vivian. Vivian didn't miss a beat. "Triceratops are my favorite." "That's a good choice. Daddy likes T-Rex, which is boring." "Hey," Caleb protested, "what about ice cream?" Ellie continued her interrogation. "What's your favorite?" "Mint chocolate chip." Ellie considered this carefully, then nodded. "Okay, you can come get ice cream with us." It wasn't a request, it was a decree. Vivian looked at Caleb, question in her eyes. This was moving fast, faster than they'd planned. Ice cream meant public appearance, meant solidifying whatever this was in Ellie's mind, meant crossing from careful privacy into deliberate visibility. Caleb thought about Derek's wife, 3 rows ahead, already texting. He thought about the whispers that would follow them. He thought about all the careful distance they'd maintained. Then he looked at Ellie, beaming in her broken penguin costume, and at Vivian, who was looking at his daughter like she was something precious. "Ice cream sounds perfect," he said. They went to the place near their apartment, a family-owned shop that stayed open late and made their own flavors. Ellie got her usual chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. Caleb got vanilla. Vivian ordered mint chocolate chip, and when Ellie declared this acceptable, Caleb saw something shift in Vivian's expression. Pleasure, yes, but also relief. Like she'd passed some crucial test she hadn't known she was taking. They sat at a small table by the window, Ellie between them, talking non-stop about the play, about her classmates, about everything and nothing. Vivian listened with genuine interest, asking questions that suggested she actually cared about the social dynamics of 2nd grade. "Madison's mom said her dad is getting a promotion," Ellie announced through a mouthful of chocolate. "She said that means they're better than everyone." "That's not how promotions work," Vivian said mildly. "That's what I said." Ellie turned to her father. "Right, Daddy?" "Right." Caleb glanced at Vivian. "Being good at your job doesn't make you better than other people. It just means you're good at your job." "Exactly," Vivian agreed. "Some of the best people I know have nothing to do with my work. They're good at being kind, or being honest, or being brave." She smiled at Ellie, "or being really committed penguin performers." Ellie giggled, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This could work. Maybe. If they were careful. They walked back toward the apartment, the December night cold enough to see their breath. Ellie ran ahead slightly, tracking footprints in the fresh snow, while Caleb and Vivian walked side by side, careful not to touch, but hyper-aware of the small space between them. "Thank you for coming tonight," Caleb said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me." "Ellie invited you. She has good instincts." They watched Ellie spin in a circle, arms outstretched, catching snowflakes. "Derek's going to hear about this," Vivian said, matter of fact. "I know. It'll make things complicated." "I know that too." Caleb shoved his hands in his pockets. "Do you want to pull back?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, watching Ellie's snow dance. "I've spent my entire career managing risk, calculating probabilities, choosing safe options." She turned to look at him. "And I'm tired of it. So no, I don't want to pull back. I want to stop being afraid of people like Derek and start living like what we're doing actually matters." "It matters to me. It matters to me too." She paused. "Which is why I'm going to handle Derek directly. Tomorrow. No more implications and whispers. If he has concerns about impropriety, he can raise them formally, and I'll show him exactly how much documentation we have proving otherwise." And if the board asks questions, then I'll answer them honestly. We met, we developed feelings, we handled it professionally through proper channels. End of story. Her voice hardened. I refuse to treat something good like something shameful. They'd reached his building. Ellie was making a snow angel on the sidewalk, her movements creating perfect wings in the white. Come on, kiddo, Caleb called. You're going to freeze. She jumped up, covered in snow and grinning. Bye, Vivian. Thanks for coming to my play. Bye, Ellie. Thanks for letting me crash your ice cream celebration. Ellie hugged her, sudden, impulsive, completely natural. Vivian froze for just a second before returning the embrace, and Caleb saw her eyes close briefly, something vulnerable crossing her face. Then Ellie was running inside, leaving Caleb and Vivian alone on the snowy sidewalk. She's wonderful, Vivian said softly. She really is. I meant what I said about not pulling back. She met his eyes. I'm in this, Caleb. Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I'm in. Caleb wanted to kiss her. Standing there in the December snow, her cheeks flushed from cold, her guard completely down. He wanted to close the distance and make this real in a way that words couldn't. But Ellie was watching from the apartment window upstairs, and this moment was too important to rush. Me too, he said instead. I'm in too. Vivian smiled, and it transformed her face into something younger, lighter. Then I'll see you Saturday? Same coffee shop? Same coffee shop. She walked to her car and Caleb stood watching until she drove away, then headed inside where Ellie was waiting with questions he knew were coming. So? She demanded before he'd even closed the door. Is Vivian your girlfriend? I don't know yet. We're figuring it out. Well, I like her. She listened when I talked about the play, and she didn't check her phone like Madison's mom always does. Those are important qualities, and she knew Triceratops was a good choice. That's very smart. Ellie climbed onto the couch. You should probably keep her. I'll take that under advisement. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Caleb's phone rang. Not Vivian. Marcus Chen, his supervisor. Caleb, sorry to call so late. Quick question. Did you attend a school event tonight with Vivian Hale? His stomach dropped. Yes. She came to my daughter's school play. Okay. Marcus sounded tired. Derek Hartman just sent an email to the executive team raising concerns about appropriate boundaries. I need to document that the event was personal, not professional. It was completely personal. My daughter invited her. Good. Send me a quick email confirming that, and we should be fine. But Caleb? Marcus paused. I don't care about office politics, and your personal life is your business. But Derek's gunning for Vivian, and he's trying to use you to do it. Be careful. After hanging up, Caleb stared at his phone, anger building. Derek was weaponizing a 7-year-old school play. Using Ellie to create doubt about Vivian's judgment. This was exactly the instability he'd feared. But instead of pulling back, Caleb found himself pulling up Vivian's number. Hi, she answered. Everything okay? Marcus just called. Derek sent an email to the executive team about tonight. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Of course he did. I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have... Stop. Her voice was firm. This is Derek being Derek. It has nothing to do with you. But if you just what? Hidden? Pretended we don't care about each other? Told your daughter she couldn't invite someone to her school play because of office politics? Vivian's voice softened. Caleb, I meant what I said. I'm done letting people like Derek dictate how I live my life. Even if it costs you? It won't cost me anything that matters. And if it does? She paused. Then maybe what I'm fighting for wasn't worth having anyway. After they hung up, Caleb sat in his dark living room, looking at the photo of Sarah on the bookshelf. For 5 years, he'd chosen safety over risk, predictability over possibility. He'd built a fortress around Ellie and himself, convinced that keeping everyone else out was the same as keeping them safe. But Ellie had invited Vivian to her play, had hugged her on the sidewalk, had declared with 7-year-old certainty that they should keep her. Maybe safety wasn't the fortress. Maybe safety was trusting the right people to help defend what mattered. His phone buzzed with a message from Vivian. Vivian, whatever Derek tries tomorrow, we handle it together. Deal? Caleb looked at those words, together, and felt something shift inside him. Caleb, deal, together. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of snow. and somewhere across the city, Derek Hartman was probably crafting his next move. But for the first time in years, Caleb wasn't planning his retreat. He was planning to stand his ground, and he wasn't doing it alone. Morning arrived with all the warmth of a corporate execution. Caleb was at his desk by 7:30, earlier than usual, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee. The email to Marcus documenting the school play sat in his sent folder, clinical and professional, reducing Ellie's joy to bullet points about personal versus professional boundaries. His phone buzzed at 8:15. Vivian. Executive meeting at 9. Derek's calling for a discussion about leadership accountability. This should be interesting. Caleb, do you want me there? Vivian. No, this is my fight, but thank you for offering. Caleb. Let me know how it goes. Vivian. I will. And Caleb? Don't worry, I've handled worse than Derek Hartman. The hour between 8:15 and 9:15 stretched like taffy. Caleb tried to focus on work, budget reconciliations, quarterly projections, anything to keep his mind occupied. But his thoughts kept circling back to Vivian, alone in a boardroom with executives who'd been waiting for any excuse to question her authority. At 9:20, his phone rang. Marcus. Conference room 3, now. Caleb's blood went cold. What's happening? Just get here. Conference room 3 was on the executive floor, all glass walls and leather chairs that cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. When he arrived, Marcus was waiting outside, expression grim. What's going on? Caleb demanded. Derek's pushing for a formal investigation into potential conflicts of interest. He's claiming Vivian's relationship with you represents a pattern of unprofessional behavior. Marcus lowered his voice. They want your statement, on record. My statement about what? We've followed every protocol. I know, but Derek's spinning it differently. He's suggesting the protocols were manipulated, that the transfer was a cover-up rather than proper procedure. Marcus met his eyes. You need to be very careful what you say in there. They're looking for inconsistencies. The conference room held 5 people when Caleb entered. Vivian sat at one end of the table, spine straight, expression controlled. Derek occupied the opposite end, looking smug. Between them sat 3 board members Caleb recognized from company communications: Richard Morrison, the board chairman, Sandra Chen, head of the audit committee, and Michael Torres, who'd been with Westbrook since its founding. Mr. Morgan, Richard said, gesturing to an empty chair. Thank you for joining us. I know this is unusual, but given the nature of Mr. Hartman's concerns, we felt it important to get your perspective directly. Caleb sat, hyper-aware of Vivian 3 seats away. She met his eyes briefly, and in that moment, he saw everything she wasn't saying. Trust me. Don't panic. We knew this was coming. I'm happy to answer any questions, Caleb said carefully. Derek leaned forward, all practiced concern. Mr. Morgan, can you describe the nature of your relationship with Miss Hale? We're dating. The directness seemed to surprise them. Sandra's eyebrows rose. Richard made a note. And when did this relationship begin? Derek pressed. We had our first dinner on November 20th. We began dating, officially, in early December, after my departmental transfer was finalized. But you were having personal dinners before the transfer, Derek said, while Ms. Hale was still your direct supervisor. One dinner, and I requested the transfer the following Monday specifically to avoid any conflict of interest. Requested or were instructed to request? Derek's smile was sharp. There's a difference between voluntary action and directed cover-up. Vivian's hands tightened on the table, but she remained silent. I requested it, Caleb said firmly. I wanted to ensure there was no question about professional boundaries. Richard intervened. Mr. Morgan, I appreciate your directness, but you understand why this raises concerns. The CEO having a romantic relationship with an employee creates inherent power dynamics, regardless of reporting structure. I do understand, which is why we've been extremely careful about documentation, about maintaining professional separation at work, about ensuring every interaction is above reproach. Caleb looked directly at Richard. I'm not naive about the complications, but we've handled this the right way. Have you? Derek pulled out a folder, sliding papers across the table. Because I have documented instances of Ms. Hale showing preferential treatment. Your performance review scores increased 20% after your first dinner. Your project assignments suddenly aligned with high visibility initiatives. Your salary adjustment in December was 15% above standard cost of living increases. Caleb's stomach dropped. He'd assumed those things were merit-based, earned through actual performance. Now Derek was making them sound like payments for personal favors. Those adjustments were recommended by my direct supervisor, Marcus Chen, Caleb said, not by Ms. Hale. Recommendations that Ms. Hale approved without question. Derek's voice was poison wrapped in professionalism. Convenient timing, don't you think? Or, Vivian said quietly, speaking for the first time, it's competent management rewarding good work. Caleb's performance metrics speak for themselves. The Meridian integration was ahead of schedule and under budget because of his strategic planning. His salary adjustment reflected market value for his position and experience. And the timing, Derek challenged, was coincidental. The annual review cycle happens in December. Caleb was due for adjustment regardless of our personal relationship. Vivian's voice hardened. Unless you're suggesting I should have penalized him professionally because we're involved personally, because that would actually be inappropriate. Sandra Chen, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Ms. Hale, I think the concern is whether you can maintain objectivity about Mr. Morgan's performance and compensation when you're personally involved. I maintained objectivity by removing myself from his direct chain of command, Vivian replied. All of Caleb's reviews now go through Marcus Chen and the strategic planning director. I have no input on his day-to-day performance or advancement. But you still have ultimate authority over departmental budgets, promotions, and terminations, Derek pointed out. The appearance of conflict remains. Michael Torres, who'd been watching this exchange with the patience of someone who'd seen countless boardroom battles, finally spoke. It seems to me we have two separate questions here. First, has Ms. Hale violated any company policies? And second, does her relationship with Mr. Morgan represent a conflict of interest that undermines her leadership? Exactly, Derek said, and I believe the answer to both is yes. On what grounds? Vivian's voice was ice. Show me one policy I've violated, one regulation I've ignored, one procedure I've circumvented. Derek smiled. The policy about romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates, which was followed. Caleb is no longer my subordinate. Only after you arranged his transfer to eliminate the appearance of impropriety while maintaining your influence over his career. Derek leaned back, confident. The policy exists to prevent exactly this situation. Powerful executives using their position to pursue personal relationships with employees. I didn't use my position, Vivian said, and Caleb heard the control it took to keep her voice level. I made my interests clear. I gave Caleb the option to decline without consequence. When he expressed concerns about power dynamics, I immediately initiated the transfer process. Everything was documented through HR. Everything followed protocol. Your protocol, Derek countered, designed by you, approved by you, executed by you. How convenient. The room went very quiet. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. I think we need to take a brief recess. Ms. Hale, Mr. Hartman, if you could step outside for a moment, the board would like to discuss this privately with Mr. Morgan. Vivian's eyes met Caleb's as she stood. In them, he saw fear carefully masked as confidence. This was it, the moment where everything could collapse. After the door closed behind them, Richard turned to Caleb with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you feel pressured into this relationship? Any sense that declining Ms. Hale's interest would impact your employment or advancement? No, Caleb said without hesitation. Vivian made it clear I could say no. She structured the conversation specifically to give me that option. But you must have felt some pressure, Sandra said gently, even unconsciously. She's the CEO. You're an employee. That inherent power dynamic doesn't disappear just because she says it does. Caleb chose his next words carefully. I felt concerned about the power dynamic, which is why I insisted on the transfer before we moved forward. But pressure from Vivian? No. If anything, she was more worried about putting me in an uncomfortable position than I was. And the performance reviews, Michael asked? The salary adjustment? You don't think those were influenced by your personal relationship? I think they were influenced by my work, which has been consistently above standard since before Vivian and I ever had dinner. Caleb straightened in his chair. Look, I understand what this looks like from the outside. I understand why Derek's raising concerns. But I've spent 5 years keeping my head down, doing my job, going home to my daughter. I'm not some opportunist trying to sleep my way up the corporate ladder. No one's suggesting, Richard started. Yes, they are. That's exactly what Derek's suggesting. Caleb's voice was firm but controlled. And I'm telling you, it's not true. Vivian and I are two adults who developed feelings for each other and handled it professionally. We could have hidden it, kept it secret, made it actually inappropriate. Instead, we documented everything, transferred departments, and went through proper channels, and now we're being punished for doing it right. The three board members exchanged glances. Mr. Morgan, Sandra said quietly, if this relationship were to end badly, do you believe you could continue working here under Ms. Hale's leadership? The question landed like a grenade. I don't know, Caleb admitted. But I could ask you the same thing if any workplace relationship ended badly. Should no one at Westbrook date each other because it might not work out? That's different, is it? Or is this just about the fact that it's the CEO? He looked at each of them in turn. Because if the issue is that Vivian's too powerful to have a personal life, that seems like a problem with how we view leadership, not with how we view relationships. Michael Torres almost smiled. That's a fair point. Richard stood, signaling the conversation was ending. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. You can go. We'll discuss this with Mrs. Hale and Mr. Hartman and make a determination. Caleb walked out on shaking legs. Vivian and Derek were in separate corners of the hallway, carefully not looking at each other. Vivian's eyes found his immediately, questioning. He gave her the smallest nod. I told the truth. That's all I could do. Back at his desk, Caleb couldn't focus. The morning stretched into afternoon with no word from the executive floor. Marcus stopped by once, asking how it went, but Caleb had no answers to give. At 3:45, his phone buzzed. Vivian, can you meet me? Not the office. Grant Park, same bench where we had our second coffee. Caleb, on my way. He found her sitting by the lake, Chicago wind cutting across the water, her coat wrapped tight. She looked smaller somehow, less like the woman who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone who'd just fought a battle they weren't sure they'd won. Caleb sat beside her, close, but not touching. They've called a full board meeting for tomorrow, Vivian said quietly, to vote on whether my relationship with you represents a conflict of interest that requires my removal as CEO. The words hit him like a physical blow. They're voting to remove you? Derek's pushing for it. Richard's neutral. Sandra seems sympathetic but concerned about optics. She stared out at the lake. Michael's the swing vote. This is insane. You've done nothing wrong. I've done something that makes them uncomfortable. In corporate America, that's often the same thing. She finally looked at him, and Caleb saw the exhaustion in her eyes. I'm sorry. I told you we'd handle this together, and instead I've made you a target. You didn't make me anything. Derek did that. Because I gave him ammunition. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. I knew better. I knew how this would look, and I did it anyway because I was selfish. Stop. Caleb turned to face her fully. You weren't selfish. You were honest. You took a risk on something that mattered. That's not a crime. It might cost me everything I've built. Then we'll deal with that, together, like you said. He wanted to take her hand, but they were still too public, still too visible. What do you need from me? I need you to understand that if this gets worse, if the board votes against me, you'll be collateral damage. She met his eyes. Derek will make sure of it. You'll be the employee who slept with the CEO and destroyed her career. That will follow you. I don't care. You should. You have Ellie to think about, your reputation, your future employment. I care about you, Caleb interrupted, and I care about the fact that we did this right, and we're still being punished for it. And I'm not walking away just because it got complicated. Vivian's breath caught. You might not have a choice. If they remove me, Derek will push to have you terminated too. He'll frame it as cleaning house, eliminating conflicts. Let him try. Caleb's voice was steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. I'll fight it. I'll lawyer up if I have to, but I'm not abandoning you because Derek Hartman wants to weaponize basic human connection. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the city moving around them, both of them processing the reality that tomorrow might change everything. What did you tell the board? Vivian asked finally. When they questioned you alone? The truth. That you gave me the option to say no. That we handled everything professionally. That my performance metrics justified my salary adjustment. He paused. And that if the issue is that you're too powerful to have a personal life, that's a problem with how we view leadership. Vivian's eyes widened slightly. You said that? I did. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Caleb allowed himself a small smile. But I meant it. You've spent 15 years building Westbrook. You've navigated hostile takeovers and market crashes and a board that's tried to oust you twice. And now they want to remove you because you had the audacity to date someone? That's not about propriety. That's about control. Derek doesn't want to control me. He wants to replace me. Then don't let him. Caleb finally did take her hand briefly, hidden between their bodies where passing joggers wouldn't see. Fight back. You're good at that. I'm tired of fighting. I know, but you're not fighting alone anymore. Vivian squeezed his hand once before letting go. I need to prepare for tomorrow. Review every document, every communication, every policy. Derek's going to come armed with everything he can twist against me. What can I do? Take care of Ellie. If this goes badly, she's going to see things in the news, hear things from other parents. She needs to know you're steady. Vivian stood, pulling her coat tighter. And Caleb? If the board votes against me, if I lose my position, I need you to promise you won't blame yourself. How can I not? This is happening because of me. This is happening because Derek is threatened by competent women, and I gave him an excuse to act on it. She touched his face briefly, so quick anyone watching would miss it. But I don't regret it. Even if I lose everything tomorrow, I don't regret choosing you. She walked away before he could respond, and Caleb sat alone on the bench, watching the lake turn gray as the sun set behind him. That night, Ellie noticed something was wrong. You're quiet, she said over dinner, pushing her mac and cheese around her plate. Just thinking about work stuff. Is it about Vivian? Caleb looked up sharply. What makes you say that? Because you get a different kind of quiet when it's about her. Ellie's voice was matter-of-fact. Like you're worried, but also not worried. It's weird. 7 years old and already reading him like a book. There's some stuff happening at work, Caleb admitted carefully. Some people think it's not okay that Vivian and I are dating. Why not? Because she's kind of my boss, even though I don't work for her directly anymore. Ellie frowned. But you like her, right? I do. And she likes you? I think so. Then who cares what other people think? She said it with the absolute certainty of childhood, like complex adult problems had simple solutions. It's more complicated than that, kiddo. Grown-ups always say that. Ellie finally took a bite of her dinner. But maybe it's not. Maybe you just like her and that's okay, and people should mind their own business. Caleb almost laughed despite everything. You know what? You're absolutely right. Of course I am. I'm very smart. She grinned. Is Vivian in trouble? Maybe. I don't know yet. Because of you? The question was too perceptive, too close to Caleb's own fears. It's complicated, he said again. If she is, are you going to help her? I'm trying to. Ellie nodded, satisfied. Good. Because she came to my penguin play even though she's super busy, so we should help her back. That's how it works. Later, after Ellie was asleep, Caleb pulled out his laptop and did something he hadn't done in years. He updated his resume. Not because he was giving up, but because Vivian was right. If this went badly, Derek would come for him too, and he needed to be ready. His phone buzzed at 11:30. Vivian. Still awake? Caleb. Yeah, can't sleep. You? Vivian. Reviewing documents. Found something interesting. Caleb. What? Vivian. Derek's wife is on the board of a competing firm, and that firm just made an offer to acquire Westbrook. Caleb sat up straighter. Caleb. Are you saying this whole thing is... Vivian. Corporate espionage, hostile takeover? Maybe. Derek's been pushing for the sale for months. The board keeps voting against it. But if I'm removed as CEO, the board composition changes. Suddenly, the acquisition becomes viable. Caleb. He's using us as the excuse to oust you so he can sell the company? Vivian. That's what I'm going to argue tomorrow. Whether they believe me is another question. Caleb. Do you have proof? Vivian. Circumstantial. Emails, meeting notes, nothing definitive, but enough to create reasonable doubt about Derek's motives. Caleb. Vivian, if you're right, Vivian, then this was never about propriety. It was about eliminating the only person standing between Derek and a very lucrative sale. A pause. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. Caleb. Stop apologizing. We're in this together, remember? Vivian. Together. Right. Caleb. Get some sleep. You'll need it tomorrow. Vivian. You too. And Caleb, thank you for not running. Caleb. I'm done running from things that matter. The next morning arrived gray and threatening snow. Caleb took Ellie to school, hugged her longer than usual, and drove to Westbrook with his stomach in knots. The board meeting was scheduled for 10. Caleb wasn't invited, but Marcus texted him updates throughout the morning. Marcus. Meeting started. Vivian's presenting her case. Marcus. Derek's countering with documentation of preferential treatment. Marcus. Vivian just dropped the acquisition bomb. Board's not happy. Marcus. Derek's demanding proof. This is getting intense. At 11:15, Marcus appeared at Caleb's desk in person. Conference room 3, now. They want you again. This time the conference room held more people. The full board, 7 members instead of 3, plus Derek, Vivian, and several lawyers Caleb didn't recognize. Richard Morrison looked exhausted. Mr. Morgan, thank you for coming. We have some additional questions arising from this morning's discussion. Caleb sat, acutely aware that every eye in the room was on him. Ms. Hale has made some serious allegations about Mr. Hartman's motivations for raising concerns about your relationship, Richard continued. She's suggesting this entire investigation is a pretext for removing her to facilitate a corporate acquisition. Do you have any information that supports or contradicts that claim? Caleb looked at Vivian. From my perspective, Derek's concerns about propriety seem selective. He's never raised issues about other workplace relationships. Several executives are married to former subordinates. 2 VPs are dating employees from different divisions. None of those relationships triggered investigations. Huh? Those relationships didn't involve the CEO, Derek snapped. Exactly, Caleb replied, which suggests this isn't about the relationship itself. It's about who's in the relationship. Sandra Chen spoke up. Mr. Morgan, are you suggesting Mr. Hartman is targeting Ms. Hale specifically? I'm suggesting that the timing is suspicious. The intensity is disproportionate. And the fact that removing Vivian would directly benefit someone with a financial interest in acquiring Westbrook seems relevant. Derek stood, face red. This is absurd. I'm protecting this company from a CEO who's let her personal life compromise her judgment. Have I? Vivian's voice cut through the room like a blade. Show me one business decision I've made that was influenced by my relationship with Caleb. One contract, one hire, one strategic choice. Your judgment is compromised by the mere existence of the relationship. Then every CEO who's ever been married should be removed, Vivian shot back. Every executive who has children, who has friends, who has any personal connections that might theoretically influence their decisions. Where does it end, Derek? The room fell silent. Michael Torres cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. The board needs to deliberate privately. He looked at Caleb, then Vivian, then Derek. All of you, out. We'll call you back when we've reached a decision. In the hallway, Vivian looked like she might shatter. Caleb wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but Derek was watching them like a hawk, and any gesture would just provide more ammunition. So they stood in separate corners, waiting. An hour passed. Then 2. At 1:30, Patricia emerged from the conference room. They're ready. The board sat in identical positions, faces carefully neutral. Richard Morrison stood at the head of the table. After extensive deliberation, the board has reached several conclusions. First, regarding Mr. Hartman's allegations of conflicts of interest and inappropriate conduct by Mrs. Hale, we find no evidence of policy violations. All proper procedures were followed. The relationship was disclosed, documented, and handled professionally. Vivian's shoulders dropped slightly. Relief, carefully controlled. However, Richard continued, and Caleb's stomach tightened. We are concerned about the appearance of impropriety and the potential for future conflicts. Therefore, We are implementing new policies regarding executive relationships that require increased oversight and mandatory recusal from any decisions involving romantic partners. That's reasonable? Vivian said quietly. Second, regarding Mr. Hartman's conduct during this investigation, Richard's voice hardened. We've reviewed the documentation Ms. Hale provided about the proposed acquisition. While we cannot prove improper motivation, the timing and intensity of these allegations raise questions about whether personal financial interests influenced professional judgment. Derek's face went white. Therefore, Richard continued, Derek Hartman is being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into potential conflicts of interest related to the acquisition proposal. If evidence of impropriety is found, termination will follow. This is ridiculous, Derek started. This meeting is adjourned, Richard said firmly. Derek, please collect your personal items and leave the building. Security will escort you. The room emptied slowly, board members filing out with careful neutrality. Vivian stood frozen, like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Caleb waited until only they remained, then crossed the space between them. You did it, he said quietly. We did it. Her voice was shaky. I couldn't have fought this alone. You're not alone anymore. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she smiled. Not the professional mask, the real thing. No, she said. I'm not. They walked out of the conference room together, not touching, but side by side, and somehow that felt like the most important statement they could make. In the elevator, Vivian finally let herself breathe. I need a drink, and possibly a week-long nap. Rain check on the drink. I have to pick up Ellie in 20 minutes. Of course. She touched his arm briefly. Tell her thank you. For what? For reminding me what actually matters, for drawing pictures with 3 people holding hands, for being perceptive enough to know we should keep each other. Vivian's eyes were bright. She's pretty smart, your daughter. Yeah, Caleb said softly. She really is. That evening, over pizza that Ellie insisted tasted better because they were celebrating, Caleb told her what he could about the day. So Vivian's okay? Ellie asked around a mouthful of cheese. She's okay. And you're okay? I'm okay too. And the mean people at work? Are going to leave us alone now. Ellie nodded, satisfied. Good, because I already invited Vivian to my birthday party next month, and it would be weird if she couldn't come because of work stuff. Caleb nearly choked on his pizza. You did what? Invited her to my birthday party. She said yes. Ellie grinned. Is that okay? Looking at his daughter, covered in pizza sauce, completely confident in her social planning, utterly certain that the important people in her life should be part of her celebrations, Caleb felt something settle into place. Yeah, kiddo, he said. That's more than okay. Later, after Ellie was asleep, Caleb texted Vivian. Caleb, apparently you've been invited to a birthday party next month. Vivian, Ellie mentioned it. I hope that's all right. Caleb, it's perfect. Fair warning. Second-grade birthday parties make penguin plays look calm and organized. Vivian, I've survived hostile board meetings. I think I can handle some cake and presents. Caleb, famous last words. Vivian, Caleb? Caleb, yeah? Vivian, thank you for today, for all of it. Caleb, we're in this together, remember? Vivian, together. I like the sound of that. Caleb set down his phone and looked around his small apartment, the place he'd built as a fortress, the life he'd structured around safety and predictability and careful control. It didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a beginning. The weeks after the board meeting moved differently than before. Not faster or slower, but lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted that Caleb hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. Derek Hartman's administrative leave turned into resignation 2 weeks later, followed by a carefully worded press release about pursuing other opportunities. The acquisition attempt died quietly, and Westbrook's stock actually rose when investors realized the company wasn't being gutted for parts. Life settled into something that resembled normal, except normal now included Vivian. She started appearing at their apartment on Sunday mornings, bringing bagels and the newspaper, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ellie building increasingly complex Lego structures. She learned the names of Ellie's stuffed animals, all 17 of them, and their individual personalities. She sat through animated movies about talking cars and singing princesses without complaint. She helped with homework, approaching second-grade math problems with the same focused intensity she brought to quarterly earnings reports. And slowly, carefully, she became part of the fabric of their lives. January brought Ellie's 8th birthday, and true to her word, Vivian showed up at the bowling alley party with a present wrapped in paper covered in dinosaurs. "You remembered," Ellie said, eyes wide as she tore into the package. "Of course I remembered. Triceratops are your favorite." Inside was a model dinosaur kit, the expensive kind with hundreds of tiny pieces and historical accuracy. Ellie threw her arms around Vivian's waist, unself-conscious and joyful, and Caleb watched Vivian's face transform, surprise melting into something softer, more vulnerable. Later, while Ellie bowled with her friends and Caleb kept score, Vivian sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me. She invited you." "I know, but you could have discouraged it, could have kept this part of your life separate." Vivian watched Ellie celebrate a strike with elaborate victory dancing. "Most people would have. Most people don't matter. You do." It was the most direct he'd been about his feelings, and Vivian turned to look at him, something unspoken passing between them. "Caleb, strike!" Ellie came running over, crashing into Caleb's legs. "Did you see? Did you see?" "I saw. That was amazing." "Vivian, did you see?" "I did. Very impressive form." Ellie beamed, then ran back to her friends, leaving the adults in her wake. "She's happy," Vivian observed. "Really happy." "Yeah, she is." Caleb paused. "Are you?" The question seemed to catch Vivian off guard. She considered it seriously, like she was running calculations in her head. "I am," she said finally, and it sounded like a revelation. "I'm actually happy. When did that happen?" "Probably around the time you started caring about Lego architecture and penguin plays." "Probably." She smiled, and it was the smile Caleb had learned meant she was about to say something important. "I've been thinking." Whatever she'd been about to say was interrupted by 12 eight-year-olds demanding pizza, but Caleb filed the moment away for later. That later came 2 weeks into February, when Chicago was buried under 18 inches of snow, and the city had that hushed, magical quality that heavy snowfall brings. Ellie was at a sleepover, her first overnight at a friend's house, which Caleb had agonized over before finally, reluctantly, agreeing to. Which meant for the first time since they'd started dating, he and Vivian had an entire evening alone. They'd planned dinner at a quiet restaurant, something nice but not too formal. Instead, they ended up at Caleb's apartment with takeout containers spread across the coffee table, snow falling past the windows, the city muffled and distant. "I had a whole speech planned," Vivian said, setting down her chopsticks. "Very eloquent. Probably too formal, definitely overthought." "You? Overthinking?" Caleb smiled. "Shocking." "I'm serious." She turned to face him fully. "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks, and I keep failing because there aren't right words for this." Caleb's heart started beating faster. "For what?" "For explaining that somewhere between coffee shops and board meetings and Lego towers, I fell in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back too long. "And with your daughter. And with this life you've built that's so different from anything I've ever known. And I don't know how to do this, any of this, but I know I don't want to do it without you." The silence that followed was full of snow and city sounds and Caleb's pulse thundering in his ears. "I spent 5 years convinced that loving someone meant risking everything," he said quietly. "That opening up meant giving someone the power to destroy what I'd built." He reached for her hand, "And then you showed up and proved me wrong about all of it." "I didn't do anything. You did everything. You showed me that safety isn't the same as happiness. That protecting Ellie doesn't mean protecting her from every possible hurt. It means showing her what healthy risk-taking looks like." He squeezed her hand. "You made me brave again, and I love you for it." Vivian's breath caught. "Say that again?" "I love you. Again." "I love you, Vivian Hale. I love your terrible habit of working at midnight. I love how seriously you take second-grade homework. I love that you're brilliant and driven and absolutely terrifying in board meetings, and also that you cry at animated movies when you think no one's watching." I don't cry at animated movies. You cried at the one about the robot and the plant. That's different. That's art. Caleb laughed, pulling her closer. I love that you're arguing with me about this. I love that you notice, Vivian said softly. I spent so long being invisible in the ways that mattered, being seen for corporate achievements but not for who I actually am underneath. She touched his face gently. You see me, the real me. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, just me. There's nothing just about you. They kissed then, finally, after months of careful distance and professional boundaries and waiting for the right moment. It was gentle and urgent all at once, years of loneliness and careful guardedness dissolving into something warmer, more certain. When they pulled apart, Vivian was smiling in a way Caleb had never seen before, unguarded, completely present. So what now? She asked. Now we figure it out, together. Together, she echoed. I like that word. They spent the rest of the evening talking about futures instead of pasts, about possibilities instead of fears. Vivian told him about the house she'd been looking at. Too big for one person, perfect for three. Caleb told her about his concerns, his worries about Ellie getting attached and then hurt, his fear that he was moving too fast or not fast enough. What does Ellie think? Vivian asked. About what? About us. About me being more permanent. Caleb pulled out his phone, scrolling to a drawing Ellie had made last week. 3 stick figures holding hands outside a house, a sun in the corner, hearts floating above their heads. She labeled them, he said, showing Vivian. Daddy. Me. Vivian. Vivian stared at the drawing, eyes bright. She drew me with you. She draws you with us in everything now. Family portraits for school, holiday cards, that thing about what she's grateful for at Thanksgiving. He paused. She already thinks of you as family. The question is whether you're okay with that. Okay with it? Caleb, I've spent 15 years building a company, creating something from nothing, watching it grow, being proud of what it became. She looked up at him. But it's not a family. It's not this. And yeah, it terrifies me because I have no idea how to be a mother, even a stepmother, and I'll probably mess it up constantly. You won't mess it up. I will. But I want to try anyway. I want to be the person she draws in her pictures. I want Sunday morning bagels and homework help and birthday parties at bowling alleys. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. I want all of it. With both of you. Caleb kissed her again, softer this time, and when he pulled back, he was smiling. There's something I need to ask you, he said, but I need to do it right. What do you mean? I mean, he stood, moving to his bedroom and returning with a small box he'd been carrying in his coat pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I mean this. Vivian stared at the box. Caleb, before you panic, this isn't what it looks like. Or maybe it is. I don't know, I've never done this before. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. This was Sarah's, not her wedding ring. That's in a safe deposit box for Ellie when she's older. This was a promise ring I gave her when we first started dating. Vivian's hand went to her mouth. I'm not asking you to replace her, Caleb continued. I'm not asking you to be her or fill some void she left. But I'm asking if you'd wear this as a promise that we're building something new. Something that honors what came before but isn't defined by it. A promise, Vivian repeated softly. A promise that we're in this together. That we're going to mess up and figure it out and choose each other anyway. That we're done letting fear make our decisions for us. He took the ring from the box. What do you say? Vivian held out her hand and Caleb slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the lamplight. I say yes, she whispered, to all of it, the messiness and the uncertainty and the choosing each other. Yes. They held each other as snow continued to fall outside, Chicago wrapped in white silence, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt completely, entirely certain. This was right. This was home. The next morning, Caleb picked up Ellie from her sleepover to find her vibrating with excitement about staying up until 10 o'clock and eating 4 slices of pizza. Did you have a good time? He asked as she buckled into her car seat. The best time. Can I have another sleepover next week? Let's see how exhausted you are first. I'm not exhausted. She yawned enormously, undermining her argument. Back at the apartment, Vivian was making pancakes. or attempting to, given the smoke detector that had gone off twice. Ellie walked in to find her waving a dish towel at the ceiling, looking harried and completely unlike the polished CEO she was at work. "You're here!" Ellie dropped her overnight bag and ran to hug Vivian's legs. "Are you making breakfast?" "I'm trying. The pancakes are rebelling." "Daddy's better at pancakes, but yours probably taste okay." It was the most generous compliment an 8-year-old could give. They ate slightly burnt pancakes at the kitchen table, Ellie talking non-stop about her sleepover, Caleb and Vivian exchanging glances over her head. At one point, Vivian's hand moved to touch the ring on her finger, turning it absently, and Ellie noticed immediately. "That's pretty," she said, syrup dripping from her fork. "Is it new?" Vivian and Caleb exchanged another glance. They talked about how to tell Ellie, when to tell her, what words to use. Now the moment was here, unplanned and perfect in its ordinariness. "It is new," Vivian said carefully. "Your dad gave it to me last night." Ellie's eyes widened. "Like an engagement ring?" "Sort of. It's a promise ring." "What kind of promise?" Vivian looked at Caleb and he nodded. "Go ahead." "A promise that I'm going to be around for a long time," Vivian said. "That I care about you and your dad very much, and that I want to be part of your family, if that's okay with you." Ellie processed this with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. She looked at the ring, then at Vivian, then at her father. "Does this mean you're going to marry her?" she asked Caleb. "Eventually, probably, if she'll have me." "I already drew pictures of us together," Ellie said pragmatically, "so it would be weird if you didn't." She took another bite of pancake. "Can I be a flower girl?" "Absolutely," Vivian said, laughing with relief. "And can we get a dog?" "That's a separate negotiation," Caleb interjected. "But you're not saying no?" "I'm not saying no." Ellie grinned, satisfied, and went back to her pancakes like they'd just discussed weekend plans instead of the fundamental restructuring of their family. Later, after Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch watching cartoons, exhaustion finally catching up with her, Caleb and Vivian stood by the window watching the city. "That went better than expected," Vivian said. "She's been ready for this longer than we have." "Smart kid." "The smartest." Caleb wrapped an arm around her waist. "You know this changes everything, right?" "I know. Work will be different. People will have opinions. There'll be more scrutiny, more judgment, more Derek Hartmans waiting to use this against us." "Let them try." Vivian leaned into him. "I'm done hiding. Done pretending that success and happiness are mutually exclusive. Done letting other people's fears dictate my choices." "That's very inspiring. You should put it in a keynote speech." "I'm serious. For 15 years, I built walls. Professional distance, emotional control, never letting anyone see weakness." She turned to face him. "And then you showed up and proved that walls aren't strength. They're just loneliness with better architecture." "I'm stealing that line. Steal away. I have plenty more where that came from." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Chicago move through its Sunday afternoon rhythms. Somewhere in the city, people were making the same choices they'd made, choosing risk over safety, connection over isolation, messy reality over controlled emptiness. "When should we tell work?" Caleb asked. "Monday. Official announcement, full transparency. Let them gossip and speculate and eventually get bored when they realize we're just two people who fell in love." Vivian smiled. "Plus, the new conflict of interest policies mean I can't make any decisions about your employment anyway. Marcus will have to approve all your promotions." "You've been thinking about promoting me?" "You're brilliant at your job." "Of course I have." "You can't tell if that's the CEO talking or my girlfriend." "Both. I'm multifaceted like that." Monday's announcement went exactly as expected. Some people were supportive, some were skeptical. James Reeves made pointed comments about workplace relationships until Marcus shut him down with a reminder about professional conduct. Patricia, Vivian's assistant, just smiled like she'd known all along. The gossip lasted about a week before being replaced by speculation about Westbrook's new strategic partnership with a European firm. Corporate attention spans were blessedly short. March brought warmer weather and longer days, and with them, conversations about the future that felt less hypothetical and more concrete. Vivian put an offer on the house she'd been looking at, a 3-bedroom in Lincoln Park, with a yard big enough for the dog Ellie was already planning to get. Caleb met her parents over an awkward but ultimately sweet dinner, where her father grilled him about his intentions, and her mother kept asking Ellie about school. They didn't rush, didn't push for big dramatic gestures or immediate changes. Instead, they let the relationship unfold naturally. Weekend trips to museums, quiet dinners after Ellie's bedtime, family movie nights that always ended with Ellie asleep between them on the couch. In April, Vivian moved into the new house, and Ellie helped her unpack, insisting on arranging all the kitchen items by color coordination rather than function. Caleb and Ellie's apartment became a weekend retreat, a place to escape to when the new house felt too big or too new. By May, they'd fallen into a rhythm that felt less like careful negotiation and more like actual life. Ellie had her own room at Vivian's house, decorated with posters of dinosaurs and outer space. They'd established family dinner night every Tuesday, sacred and inviolate. Vivian had learned to braid hair from YouTube videos just like Caleb had years ago, and Ellie declared her French braids acceptable but not perfect. It was messy and complicated and nothing like what Caleb had planned when he'd built his careful fortress of predictability. It was perfect. One Saturday in late June, nearly 8 months after that first dinner invitation, Caleb stood in the backyard of Vivian's house watching Ellie chase fireflies in the dusk. Vivian sat beside him on the porch steps, her hand in his, both of them content to just watch. "I've been thinking," Vivian said quietly. "Dangerous habit." "I'm serious. I've been thinking about that first dinner when I told you I was tired of pretending success was enough. I remember. I didn't really understand what I was saying back then. I thought I was just lonely, just tired of empty evenings and professional accomplishments that felt hollow." She squeezed his hand. "But it was more than that. I was terrified of being vulnerable, of admitting that I'd built this incredible career and lost myself in the process." "You didn't lose yourself, you just buried yourself under responsibilities and expectations. Same result." She watched Ellie catch a firefly, examine it briefly, then release it. "But you helped me excavate, you and Ellie both. You reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings and strategic positioning. I didn't do anything except show up. That's everything, though, showing up, being present, choosing connection over isolation." Vivian turned to look at him, and in the twilight her eyes were soft. "You saved my life, Caleb Morgan. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but slowly, consistently, by just being exactly who you are. You saved mine too. You made me brave. We made each other brave," she corrected. "That's how this works, right? We choose each other, every day, and that choosing makes us stronger. Is this still about that first dinner, or are you building to something?" Vivian smiled, and there was mischief in it. "Maybe both." She stood, pulling him to his feet. "Come with me." She led him inside, away from Ellie's firefly hunting, to the living room where she'd been keeping a box hidden behind the couch. She pulled it out now, setting it on the coffee table. "What is this?" Caleb asked. "Open it." Inside was a model dinosaur, not a kit like she'd given Ellie, but a completed sculpture, professionally crafted, beautiful in its detail. A triceratops, specifically, with 3 people riding on its back. Tiny figures that, when Caleb looked closer, he recognized. A man, a woman, and a small child with pigtails. "I had it commissioned," Vivian said, "after the birthday party. I wanted to capture what Ellie keeps drawing, the 3 of us together, building something new." Caleb stared at the sculpture, throat tight. "It's perfect. There's more." She reached into the box again, pulling out a small envelope. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, trying to find the right moment. Then I realized there is no right moment, just moments we choose to make meaningful." Inside the envelope was a document, legal papers, adoption forms. "I want to adopt Ellie," Vivian said quietly. "Not to replace Sarah, never that, but to make official what's already true in my heart, that she's my daughter too, that this family we're building isn't temporary or conditional, it's permanent." Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't find words adequate for the enormity of what she was offering. "You don't have to answer now," Vivian continued, rushing slightly. "We can talk about it, think about it, make sure Ellie's comfortable with the idea. I just wanted you to know that I'm all in, completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly all in." "She already calls you mom sometimes," Caleb managed finally, "when she's talking to her friends. Did you know that?" Vivian's eyes went wide. She does? Started about a month ago. My mom helped me with my science project. My mom taught me how to make French toast. Just casual, like it's the most natural thing in the world. You didn't tell me. I was waiting to see if you'd notice. Caleb pulled her close. She already thinks of you as her mother, Vivian. This just makes it official. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Enthusiastic, definitive, absolutely yes. They held each other as the room darkened around them, the sculpture on the table catching the last rays of sunlight through the window. Outside, Ellie's laughter rang out, pure and joyful. We should probably tell her, Vivian said against his shoulder. Probably, though I suspect she'll just say she already knew. She's too smart for her own good. Gets it from both her parents. Vivian pulled back to look at him, and her smile was radiant. Both her parents. I like the sound of that. They called Ellie in from the yard, and she came running, cheeks flushed, hands cupped around a firefly. Look what I caught, she announced. Very impressive, Caleb said. But we need to talk to you about something important. Ellie immediately looked suspicious. Am I in trouble? No, nothing like that. Vivian has something she wants to ask you. Ellie turned her attention to Vivian, still cradling the firefly carefully. Ellie? Vivian began, then seemed to lose her nerve. She looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragement. Ellie, you know that I love you very much, right? Duh, you tell me all the time. Right. Well, I was wondering if you'd be okay with me becoming your mom. Officially, through adoption. Ellie frowned, considering. Would I have to change my name? Only if you wanted to. You could be Ellie Morgan Hale, or just keep Morgan, or... Morgan Hale sounds fancy, like a superhero. She looked at her father. Is this okay with you, Daddy? It's more than okay. It's what I want. But only if it's what you want too. Ellie processed this with her usual seriousness, then carefully opened her hands, releasing the firefly. They watched it fly away, blinking its light in the gathering darkness. Okay, she said finally. You can be my mom, but I still get to call you Vivian sometimes, right? Because that's your name and I like it. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Vivian said, voice thick. Cool. Ellie hugged them both, quick and fierce. Can we have ice cream now? Absolutely, Caleb said, laughing despite the tears in his eyes. The adoption process took 4 months. 4 months of paperwork and interviews and home studies, of explaining to social workers that yes, this was an unusual situation, but no, there was nothing improper about it. 4 months of Ellie telling everyone who would listen that she was getting officially adopted by her other mom, which caused some confusion at school until Caleb explained the situation to her teacher. The court date was set for late October, and on a crisp autumn morning, they stood before a judge who smiled warmly as she reviewed the paperwork. This is one of my favorite kinds of hearings, Judge Martinez said. Building families instead of dissolving them. Ellie Morgan, do you understand what adoption means? Ellie, in her best dress and slightly scuffed shoes, nodded seriously. It means Vivian becomes my legal mom, and we're all officially a family. That's exactly right. And is this something you want? Yes, ma'am, very much. And you understand that this is permanent, that Vivian will have all the rights and responsibilities of a parent? She already does most of the parent stuff. This just makes it official. The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter. Judge Martinez smiled. Well then, by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby grant this petition for adoption. Vivian Hale, you are now the legal parent of Ellie Morgan Hale. Congratulations to all of you. Vivian was crying. Caleb was crying. Even the court reporter looked misty. Ellie just looked satisfied, like she'd accomplished something she'd been planning all along. Afterward, they went to the same ice cream shop where they'd celebrated the Penguin play, and Ellie insisted on getting the biggest sundae available. To celebrate my adoption, she explained to the teenager behind the counter, who looked appropriately impressed. They ate ice cream and talked about everything and nothing, just 3 people who'd chosen each other against all probability, who'd built something beautiful out of loneliness and loss and the courage to try again. That evening, back at the house that was now legally all of theirs, Caleb found Vivian standing in Ellie's room, watching their daughter sleep. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For taking a chance on someone who had no idea how to do this, for trusting me with your daughter. for choosing me. We chose each other, Caleb said, echoing her words from months ago. That's how this works. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the doorway, watching Ellie dream, both of them marveling at the impossible thing they'd built. Christmas came with unusual warmth for Chicago, and Caleb stood in the kitchen of their house, officially theirs now, all three names on the deed, making his mother's recipe for sugar cookies while Vivian attempted to untangle lights, and Ellie directed the operation with the authority of a drill sergeant. "The star goes on top, not the middle," she instructed. "I'm aware," Vivian replied, balancing precariously on a stepladder. "Are you, though? Because you put it in the middle last year." "That was one time." Caleb watched them bicker affectionately, flour on his hands, the smell of cookies filling the air, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was it. This was the thing he'd been protecting Ellie from experiencing again. Not stability or safety, but love. Real, messy, complicated love that meant risk and vulnerability and choosing someone every single day despite the 1,000 ways it could go wrong. He'd been so afraid of instability that he'd forgotten that nothing worth having was ever truly stable. Relationships shifted and grew. Children changed. Life refused to be controlled, no matter how carefully you planned. But that wasn't chaos. That was living. "Daddy, the timer!" Ellie called. "The cookies!" He pulled them from the oven just in time, golden and perfect, and Ellie immediately tried to grab one despite his warnings about heat. "Patience," he said, swatting her hand away gently. "I've been patient all year," she protested. "Fair point." He blew on a cookie, tested it, then handed it to her. "There, fresh Christmas cookie for my favorite daughter." "I'm your only daughter," which makes you my favorite by default. Vivian climbed down from the ladder. Mission accomplished. The tree now properly decorated according to Ellie's exacting standards. She wrapped her arms around Caleb from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "This is nice," she said softly. "Define nice." "This, us, family chaos and cookie baking and arguing about tree decorations." She paused. "I never thought I'd have this." "Neither did I. Not again, anyway. I'm glad we were both wrong." Later, after Ellie was asleep and the cookies were frosted and arranged on a plate for tomorrow's gathering, Caleb and Vivian sat on the couch, lights from the Christmas tree casting colored shadows across the room. "I have something for you," Vivian said, pulling a small box from behind a cushion. "We agreed no gifts until tomorrow." "This couldn't wait." She handed him the box. "Open it." Inside was a key. Just a simple house key, nothing special. "I don't understand," Caleb said. "I already have a key to the house." "Not the house. Your apartment." Vivian took his hand. "I know you've been keeping it as a safety net, a place to retreat to if things got complicated. And I understand that, I really do. But I was hoping you might be ready to let it go, to fully commit to this being our home, all three of us, permanently." Caleb stared at the key, processing what she was really asking. The apartment had been his fortress for 5 years, his backup plan, his emergency exit if the world became too unpredictable. Keeping it meant he still believed he might need to run. Letting it go meant trusting that this, Vivian, Ellie, the life they'd built, was solid enough to stand on. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've been holding on to it as an escape route, just in case." "I know, and I don't blame you, but Caleb..." She turned to face him fully. "There is no just in case anymore. There's just us, this family, this life. And yeah, it might be messy sometimes, and we'll fight and disagree and probably drive each other crazy occasionally." "Occasionally?" "Frequently. But that's not instability. That's just being human." She squeezed his hand. "So what do you say? Ready to let go of the safety net?" Caleb looked around the room, at the Christmas tree decorated by committee, at the photos on the walls documenting their unconventional family, at the stack of Ellie's homework on the side table with Vivian's notes in the margins. This was home. Not because it was safe or controlled or predictable, but because it was real. "Yeah," he said, setting the apartment key on the table. "I'm ready." Vivian kissed him, soft and certain, and when she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "I love you, Caleb Morgan." "I love you too, Vivian Morgan Hale." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a proposal?" "Maybe." Eventually, when I can figure out how to top your adoption gesture. Take your time. We've got the rest of our lives. The rest of their lives. Once, that phrase would have terrified him. Too much uncertainty, too many variables, too many ways for things to fall apart. Now, it just sounded like promise. They sat together as the night deepened, Chicago glittering beyond the windows, and Caleb thought about the moment that had started all of this. A phone call at midnight, a dinner invitation, a choice to say yes instead of no, to risk instead of retreat, to choose possibility over safety. He'd spent 5 years building walls to protect Ellie from hurt, from instability, from the chaos of losing someone she loved. But in doing so, he'd also protected her from joy, from connection, from watching her father choose courage over fear. Vivian had changed that, had shown him that love wasn't the instability he'd been avoiding. Silence was. Isolation was. The careful, controlled emptiness of a life lived in protective custody. From Ellie's room came a small sound. She was talking in her sleep, something about dinosaurs and birthday cake, and my two favorite parents. Caleb smiled, feeling Vivian relax against him, both of them listening to their daughter dream. This was what mattered. Not the quarterly reports or the corporate politics or the opinions of people who would never understand what they'd built from loneliness and loss and the audacity to try again. Just this. 3 people choosing each other every single day, building something real from the rubble of what came before. Love wasn't instability, silence was. And Caleb Morgan, who had mastered the art of quiet survival, had finally learned to speak.